Elias Gray was 45 years old, and the stars had become the only friends he had left in the universe. His ship, the Astronova, drifted through space like a tired bird gliding through endless night. He had been a pilot since he was young, brave, once proud, but years of solitude had turned his voice quiet and his eyes hollow. The hum of the engine was the only heartbeat. He trusted the glow of the control panels, his only source of light. He would sit in the pilot seat for hours, staring out into the void, waiting for something that never came, a call, a sign, a purpose. But all that came was silence, the kind that made a man forget the sound of laughter. He had no family left, no comrades still alive. Most had died in the frontier wars. Others had retired to worlds he would never see again. Elias stayed behind, not because he wanted to, but because he did not know how to stop flying. Space had become his only home, a dark mirror that reflected everything he had lost, every regret he carried like weight in his chest. He had grown used to the stillness, the loneliness. It was easier than remembering, easier than feeling. Every time he docked at a supply station, people greeted him with nods and respect, but no one ever stayed long enough to know him. He was a legend in his own fading way, the man who never missed a flight but never smiled either. Sometimes, when the ship passed near nebulae, he would cut the engines and just watch the colors ripple across the glass like liquid fire. He would imagine that if he flew close enough, maybe he could melt into the light, disappear and become part of it. The thought never scared him, it comforted him. There was no one waiting for him anywhere, so the stars might as well be his grave. He told himself that solitude was strength, that silence was peace, but in truth it was a prison built out of routine. One night, while charting a route through a forgotten sector, he found himself staring at a blank stretch of space unmarked by any map. He wondered if it was empty or simply unexplored. Something about the darkness called to him. He opened the ship logs, typed a few notes about the route, and for a moment paused over his reflection in the glass. His face worn, his stubble gray, the lines on his forehead deep like cracks in old stone. He whispered to himself, "What are you still looking for?" But the ship offered no answer. He leaned back in the chair, letting his eyes close just for a second, when a faint blip echoed across the radar screen. It was small, distant, and flickering like a heartbeat. Weak but alive. He frowned, tapped the monitor, and watched the signal pulse again. Stronger this time. It came from a moon orbiting a dead planet in a system no one had visited in centuries. It should have been nothing, just another false reading, but something in him stirred an old instinct. Maybe curiosity, maybe hope, the kind he had not felt in years. He exhaled slowly, his hands hovering over the controls. The universe stretched wide and empty before him, yet that single flicker on the radar felt louder than the silence around him. He knew he should ignore it, continue his route, but the longer he stared, the more the emptiness pressed against him, until he finally muttered to himself, "All right, let's see what you are." The Astronova turned its engines toward the unknown, and for the first time in a long while, Elias Gray felt the faintest spark of something that might one day be called life. Again Elias guided the Astronova through the darkness toward the faint signal, his hand steady on the controls, but his mind alive with questions that had no answers. The stars outside flowed past like liquid diamonds, and for the first time in years he felt the hum of anticipation vibrating through his chest. He adjusted the thrusters, cutting through the black void, the moon ahead growing larger with each passing minute, its surface jagged and glittering like broken glass reflecting the distant sun. The signal pulsed faintly stronger now, as if urging him forward, calling him to uncover what lay hidden. The closer he got, the more the readings changed, erratic pulses of energy dancing across the monitor, some familiar, some entirely alien. He frowned, tracing patterns with his finger over the screen. He had flown through storms, nebulae, and ion storms before, but nothing had ever felt alive until now. Each blip seemed to breathe, moving like a heartbeat through the instruments. It was both terrifying and exhilarating. He had spent so long in the emptiness that the presence of something unknown made his skin tingle and his pulse race. As he descended into the moon's atmosphere, the clouds shimmered faintly like liquid metal bending the dim light of the distant star. The gravity was weaker than he expected, the ship gliding smoothly through the sky, with only the whisper of engines to break the silence. He could see the terrain below, jagged cliffs and sparkling sand plains stretching endlessly toward dark mountains in the distance. A faint haze covered the surface, making everything look otherworldly, alien, as if it belonged to a dream. He was not sure he wanted to wake from. The signal led him to a small crater in the center of a valley, its edges glowing faintly with energy readings, unlike anything he had ever encountered. Instruments spiking wildly, yet the source of the signal was not mechanical or natural. It appeared organic, a presence alive and pulsing with power. He gripped the controls tighter, his breath catching in his throat. For a moment he thought it might be a mirage or a hallucination, brought on by years of solitude, but the data confirmed what his instincts already knew. He activated the landing gears and descended, carefully, the ship settling onto the smooth crystal-like surface. The hum of the engines faded, and he stepped out into the low-gravity world, the air strange, yet breathable, carrying hints of ozone fire and something sweet. He paused, taking it all in, every sense alert, every nerve alive. The crater glowed faintly ahead, a soft pulse like a heartbeat, and at its center he saw her. She lay there seemingly asleep, her silver hair spread across the glowing sands, her skin radiant, faintly luminous. Under the alien light, the moment his eyes met hers, he froze. The signal pulsing from her body now made sense. She was the source, alive and aware, powerful, yet vulnerable in a way that pulled at something deep inside him. She opened her eyes slowly, golden and green flecks swirling in iridescent light, and he knew in that instant that nothing about this night or this discovery would ever be ordinary again. Elias took a careful step toward her, the soft glow from the crater casting long shadows across the jagged terrain. His heart hammered in his chest, every instinct screaming both fear and fascination. The air vibrated faintly around her as if the ground itself acknowledged her presence. He swallowed hard, trying to steady his breathing. His hand hovered over the communicator, ready to call for help, but some deep part of him whispered that no one could understand this, no one could witness this moment without being changed. She shifted slightly, her silver hair fanning out across the crystal sand, her eyes opening wider, golden and green swirls igniting like twin stars, reflecting something ancient and endless inside her. Elias felt his knees go weak, as if gravity had shifted around him. The hum from her body pulsed through the ground, up his legs and into his chest, each heartbeat echoing in his ears, louder than his own blood. He blinked quickly, trying to process what he was seeing. She was human, yet not human, beautiful and terrifying in a way that defied comprehension. Her gaze locked onto his, and for a moment the world narrowed to just the two of them. The wind whispered across the crater edges, carrying faint sparks of heat and energy, the air shimmering as if reality itself bent around her presence. She spoke, but the words were not sounds at first, only vibrations felt in his chest, a language older than memory, older than stars. The words, translated in his mind, clear as day, yet impossible to have come from any voice he had ever heard. "I am Serafina," she said, her voice soft yet firm, carrying authority and fragility. At once she sits, slowly pushing herself up, her limbs graceful despite the faint tremor from exhaustion. She explained she was a princess of the draconic realms, hunted by forces beyond comprehension. She had fled across stars and been forced to land here. Her ship destroyed her people, searching, and herself alone, until now. Elias realized she was the source of the signal. He had traced the pulse across systems. It was not a machine, it was her essence, alive and calling. He blinked, his mouth dry, his thoughts scattered, a lifetime of solitude crashing against the impossibility before him. He did not know how to respond. He wanted to speak words that would ease her pain, reassure her, protect her, but all he could do was stand frozen under the alien sky, the sands shimmering beneath her like starlight spilled across the ground. Every movement she made radiating light and energy that drew him in like gravity, stronger than any planet he had ever flown past. Elias swallowed and finally stepped closer, his boots leaving faint marks in the glowing sand. He offered a hand, uncertain if she would take it or recoil, his chest tight with anticipation and fear. She looked at him for a long moment, then slowly reached out, her fingers brushing his hand, a faint warmth passing through him, a current of connection and recognition unlike anything he had felt in decades. He realized then that this night had already changed everything about his life, and nothing would ever be the same again. Elias helped Serafina to her feet, her hand warm in his, as the glow from the crater wrapped around them like a living blanket. The air shimmered with faint heat and energy that made the hairs on his arms stand on end. He could feel her heartbeat through the ground, a rhythm both powerful and fragile that seemed to synchronize with his own. Every step they took toward the edge of the crater echoed softly like distant drums, carrying a message only he could understand. She looked around the barren moon, her eyes scanning the horizon, golden and green flecks dancing as if capturing every detail. She explained that her ship had crashed while fleeing from hunters, ancient and merciless creatures that wanted her kind extinct. Elias listened in silence, his mind racing with questions. He wanted to ask everything at once. Where did you come from? How can you survive? What do you need? But he did not speak. He waited, because somehow he knew the answers would come in time. Her presence filled the Astronova. When he led her aboard the ship, the corridor's cold metal and humming lights suddenly felt alive. Her silver hair flowing behind her, she moved with grace through the narrow passages, her touch gentle yet filled with energy that made the panels vibrate beneath his fingers. She stopped at the cockpit, looking out at the stars, and whispered softly that she had traveled across endless skies yet never seen one so bright, so lonely, yet so full of potential. Elias felt something stir inside him, a spark long buried under decades of solitude, her words cutting through the emptiness of his routine life. He realized how much he had forgotten the sensation of another being, noticing his presence, the warmth of conversation, the silent understanding that perhaps someone could see him for more than a pilot or a man defined by his solitude. She turned to him, her gaze curious, patient, and he felt the weight of his isolation break slightly. Over the next hours he repaired her damaged communication systems, tools and parts scattered across the cockpit and corridors while she watched him silently, studying every movement, every adjustment. She spoke little, but her presence was loud, her energy commanding and comforting all at once. She told him of her world, dragons that could fold light into themselves, cities floating among the clouds of alien suns, and storms that glimmered with colors he could not name. He listened with awe, each story pulling him further from his own shadows. He finally paused for a moment of rest. She sat beside him, the glow from the console reflecting in her eyes, illuminating the iridescent patterns across her skin. She asked about his life, his travels, his choices, and for the first time in years he spoke not of missions or stars but of loneliness, fear, and dreams left unrealized. He realized she was not just a visitor, she was a mirror reflecting all he had buried and all he had yet to discover. The night deepened around the Astronova, the stars stretching endlessly outside the viewport, and for the first time Elias did not feel the crushing weight of emptiness. He felt curiosity, anticipation, and a fragile hope that perhaps he had been waiting all his life for something beyond the routine of survival, something that would change him forever. And Serafina was already at the center of it. Elias worked through the night repairing the remnants of Serafina's damaged communication system, each spark from his tools reflected in her glowing eyes as she watched silently, her presence filling the empty corridors with warmth. He felt a strange energy radiating from her that made the metal under his hands hum faintly, as if recognizing her touch. With every adjustment he made, she spoke, softly describing her world of skies that burned like fire, oceans of crystal and forests made of light. She told him of dragons who could fold time within themselves, and cities that floated between stars. He listened in silence, each word painting images he had never dreamed of. The loneliness he had carried for decades began to shift into something heavier and brighter, something he could not name. He realized he had spent his life moving between stars, avoiding connection, avoiding anything that might hurt him, and now this being radiant and impossible stood beside him and made him question everything he had believed about solitude and purpose. The hours passed without notice, the ship quiet except for the faint hum of engines and the soft buzz of tools, until at last he paused, wiping sweat from his brow, and looked at her fully for the first time, her silver hair spilling across the floor. She was beautiful and terrifying, a creature of light and strength and vulnerability, all at once. Her golden and green eyes met his, and in that instant he felt seen, as he had not been for years. Her gaze held stories of survival, loss, and hope, and he realized he had been waiting not for someone to save him but for someone to notice that he existed beyond the ship, the stars, and the silence. She moved closer, standing beside him, her presence commanding but gentle, the soft hum of energy around her pressing lightly against his chest. He felt his heart beat faster, not from fear, but from a recognition older than memory itself. She touched the control panel lightly, and he felt a spark shoot up his arm, a current of warmth that spread through him, grounding him to the present moment. The first touch between them, sending signals that his mind could not explain but his body understood. Elias swallowed hard, words caught in his throat. He wanted to ask her everything, want to know her history, her thoughts, her fears, but the silence between them was heavy and meaningful. She did not need him to speak for her to be understood. Her presence filled the void between them, and he realized that connection was possible without words, that trust could grow in moments of quiet attention and shared purpose. When he finally spoke, it was low and hesitant, his voice rough from disuse. He asked if she was all right, if she could manage the repairs, if she needed rest. She nodded faintly, her eyes softening, and for a moment Elias understood that she had traveled across impossible distances and survived unthinkable threats, yet here she was trusting him with her safety. The loneliness he had carried so long shifted into something fragile and promising, a new chapter unfolding beneath the stars and the hum of the astronova. The next morning, Elias woke to the soft hum of the astronova vibrating beneath his hands, the faint glow of the alien moon illuminating the cockpit, and Serafina standing near the viewport, her silhouette framed by the rising light of distant stars. He had slept only briefly, but the restlessness of the night seemed to have shifted into a calm energy that filled the ship. Her presence was like a living current, brushing against every surface, and he could feel it even in the quiet of his own heartbeat. She moved closer to him, her steps silent as though the metal floor bent around her. She studied the controls with curiosity and fascination, asking questions about the stars, the engines, and the course they would take. She listened intently as he explained the mechanics of piloting and navigation, his voice stronger now, more confident because he was sharing knowledge he had once believed trivial, but her attention made it matter. She nodded and smiled faintly, as though each answer he gave was a small victory. Over the course of the day they worked together, repairing the remains of her ship, her hands brushing against his, occasionally each touch leaving a faint warmth that lingered in the air long after she moved away. She spoke of her homeworld, dragons soaring through skies painted with fire and storms that shimmered like liquid crystal. She told him of the dangers that had forced her flight, the hunters who sought her kind, the cities floating on clouds of light, and her voice carried not fear but determination and strength that made his chest tighten. With Elias listened without interruption, absorbing every word as though it were a map leading him out of the emptiness he had carried for decades. Her stories painted vivid worlds he had only glimpsed in dreams. Her laughter echoed through the corridors, soft and musical, a sound he realized he had almost forgotten, the sensation of joy, unaccompanied by duty or survival. She moved through the ship, exploring the narrow hallways and engines with fascination, like a child discovering wonders, and he could not help but smile at her wonder despite the lingering fatigue in his bones. By evening the ship drifted in orbit above the moon, the stars reflecting in the viewport, casting their faint glow across their faces. They sat side by side, Elias speaking of missions long past and mistakes he had made, while she listened quietly, occasionally offering insight or a question that made him pause and reconsider decisions he had once thought final. He realized he was beginning to trust her, not only with his ship but with the parts of himself he had hidden for years. The night deepened around them, the hum of the engines slowing to a steady rhythm, and for the first time Elias felt less like a solitary figure drifting between worlds, and more like someone part of a story, unfolding a narrative of connection, hope, and discovery. Seraphine's presence transformed the astronova from a vessel of routine into a sanctuary, a place where loneliness might be challenged and the possibility of something greater than survival could exist. As they watched the stars together, he felt a subtle shift in the energy between them, a silent promise that the journey ahead would be unlike any he had known, and that for the first time in decades the future held not emptiness but potential. That night the astronova drifted silently in orbit above the shimmering moon, the stars stretching endlessly beyond the viewport, casting pale light across the cockpit. Elias and Serafina sat side by side, their shoulders almost touching, the quiet hum of the engines filling the spaces between them. He watched her reflection in the glass, golden and green eyes glowing softly in the dim light, her silver hair floating lightly in the low gravity, and for a moment he felt the weight of decades of solitude lift, as though her presence alone had rewritten the rules of his universe. She spoke softly, telling him that the distress signal she had sent had been received, that her people would arrive by dawn, that she could leave and return to her world. But her voice trembled slightly, betraying the hesitation she tried to hide. She turned her gaze to him, her eyes searching his, and Elias realized that the universe itself had slowed around them, that the distance between the stars felt smaller somehow, as if this single night had folded time and space into something intimate, fragile, and impossible to name. Elias wanted to speak words that would anchor her to him, that would convince her to stay longer, to delay the inevitable departure. But his throat was dry, and his voice caught somewhere between fear and longing. He watched her swallow hard, biting her lip, and felt the pull of something he had not experienced in years, something deeper than curiosity or desire, something that made his heart ache with both hope and uncertainty. Serafina moved closer. Leaning against the console, she reached out, her hand brushing lightly against his arm, a spark of warmth running through him at the contact, a current of understanding passing silently between them. She whispered, "Elias, may I stay the night? Just one more." He swallowed hard, the words carrying a weight He could feel in his chest like gravity stronger than any planet he had flown past. The silence stretched between them dense, with meaning and possibility. He looked at her fully, seeing not just the alien glow of her skin, or the iridescent patterns that shimmered across her form, but the vulnerability behind her strength, the loneliness hidden beneath her radiance. He realized that she had chosen to trust him in this moment, and that trust demanded a response beyond thought, beyond hesitation. He nodded slowly, his voice barely a whisper, telling her yes without needing to articulate the words. The stars outside stretched endlessly, and for the first time, Elias felt a quiet exhilaration mingled with fear, a realization that this night was not just another stop along his endless route through space, but a turning point, a moment that would forever mark his existence, a single night that might rewrite the rhythm of his heart. The hum of the ship suddenly felt alive, echoing the connection that had blossomed quietly between them. They sat together for hours, the cosmos reflected in the viewport, their shoulders touching, and fingers brushing lightly, every gesture heavy with unspoken communication. She told him stories of her childhood, her people, and their struggles, and he shared fragments of a life spent navigating empty systems, learning to survive and endure. He realized that in this exchange, their loneliness was being transformed into something new, something shared and electric. By the time dawn approached, the horizon glimmered faintly with distant starlight, and Elias understood that the night they had shared had already changed him, that the stars no longer felt endless and cold, but full of possibility, full of meaning, because she had chosen to stay for just one night. The first light of dawn crept across the viewport of the Astronova, washing the cockpit in pale silver and gold hues. Elias and Serafina remained side by side, the quiet hum of the ship beneath them steady and warm, the universe outside stretching endlessly, yet somehow closer, somehow intimate. After the night they had shared, he felt a new awareness in every pulse of light and shadow, a fragile but undeniable connection that had formed between them in the silence and the shared moments of vulnerability. Serafina stood and moved toward the center of the cockpit, her long silver hair catching the dawn light and shimmering like liquid starlight. She turned to Elias, her eyes glowing faintly golden and green, and spoke softly, telling him that dragons felt emotions as fire, intense and consuming, that what she felt near him was warmth, not loneliness, a recognition that his presence had given her a reprieve from the dangers she had endured, and that he had opened something in her that even the vast cosmos could not extinguish. Elias swallowed hard, his chest tight with emotion, words faltering on his tongue. He wanted to express all that he felt, the awe, the longing, the fragile hope that had blossomed in the hours they had spent together. Yet he knew that words could never capture the weight of this connection. So instead he watched her, the light dancing across her scales, the subtle rise and fall of her chest, and the way she seemed both human and something beyond comprehension simultaneously. She stepped closer and touched his hand gently, a spark of warmth running through him from her skin to his veins. He felt as if the universe itself had compressed into this moment, as if every star, every planet, every lonely flight he had endured had led to this single night. She leaned slightly against him, resting her forehead lightly on his shoulder, and in that small gesture, Elias felt the weight of decades lift from his chest. The emptiness that had followed him through countless systems suddenly felt less oppressive. The cockpit was filled with a quiet energy, the stars outside reflecting their shared stillness, and the possibility that neither would forget this night. No matter where the galaxies took them next, she whispered that she wished the moment could last forever, that she had never wanted to leave, but her people were coming, and the call of her realm was unavoidable. The inevitability of departure pressed gently against them, and Elias felt a pang of longing he had not known he could feel. They stood together as the first signals of her people appeared on the radar, ships of light slicing through the horizon, their shapes alien and majestic. The stars themselves seemed to acknowledge her return, and yet Elias did not feel despair. He felt gratitude and awe that he had been part of this brief collision of worlds, that he had touched something eternal in her presence, and that she had chosen to stay, even for one night. The dawn grew brighter, and the cockpit filled with the soft glow of the approaching ships. The warmth between them lingered in silence, a shared understanding that though their paths would diverge, the memory of this night would remain etched into their hearts and into the vast memory of the cosmos itself. A night when two lonely travelers found connection and light amidst the infinite darkness. The Astronova trembled slightly as the approaching ships pierced the thin atmosphere of the moon, their lights scattering across the cockpit windows like shards of liquid gold. Elias watched silently, his chest tight with emotion. The night they had shared still warm within him, the hum of the engines beneath his hands echoing the lingering rhythm of Seraphina's presence. The stars outside, stretching endlessly, as if holding their breath for what was about to come. Seraphina stood before him, radiant and impossible, her wings faintly visible as energy rippled beneath her scales. She turned to him, her eyes glowing golden and green, carrying the weight of gratitude, trust, and something he could not name. Her voice was soft yet firm, whispering across the cockpit that she had to return, that her people had come to take her home. Yet in that moment she hesitated, her gaze lingering on him longer than protocol or necessity would allow. Elias felt a pang of longing and fear, his life of solitude flashing before him, every lonely system, every empty star, every routine he had clung to for decades now, seemed small and insignificant compared to the gravity of this connection. He realized he had been waiting his whole life, not for adventure or purpose, but for this singular recognition. This being who could see him beyond the machine, beyond the silence, beyond himself. She stepped closer, pressing her palm lightly against his chest, the warmth of her touch spreading through him, a current of energy and emotion that made him feel both alive and exposed. He saw her true form for a fleeting instant, a dragon of radiant light wings, vast and impossible, unfurling around her body, and for a heartbeat the entire universe seemed to bend and shimmer with the intensity of her existence, and he understood that she was both fragile and infinite. At once her words carried across his mind without sound. "You showed me that even the darkest star still burns," she said, her fingers brushing his cheek, her energy leaving a faint glow on his skin, a reminder of what had passed between them. And Elias swallowed hard, knowing that this night would remain with him forever, a memory embedded in every pulse of light, every shimmer of distant stars. He would never see the cosmos in the same way again. Slowly she stepped back, the faint light around her dimming, as she prepared to leave the Astronova, the ships surrounding her glowing like celestial guardians, and he reached out as if to stop her, but the gesture was unnecessary. She had already given him everything he could carry in a single night, a gift of recognition, connection, and the possibility of hope in a life defined by isolation. As the ships ascended and vanished into the void, the cockpit felt emptier than ever, yet Elias did not despair. He looked out at the stars and saw them differently, alive and vibrant, carrying her presence in every flicker, every pulse of light. He realized that though she had returned to her world, he had been changed irrevocably, the universe no longer a silent expanse, but a canvas of possibility and memory, a reminder that even in the vastest emptiness, love and connection could find a way. Elias sat back in his chair, the hum of the Astronova steady beneath him, the stars stretching endlessly before him, and for the first time in decades, he felt a quiet exhilaration, a fragile hope, knowing that somewhere out there, the dragon princess carried a part of him, as he carried a part of her, and that the night they shared would remain eternal in both their hearts.